Okay, let's get something out of the way right off the bat. I am not creating this video to garner sympathy or have anybody feel sorry for me. I am creating this video because I, like millions of other men, had something traumatic happen in their life that caused a cascade of events that negatively affected my life. And when it affects my life, it negatively affects those I loved around me and those who I still love around me. So, without any other hints, let's go ahead and dive right in. And remember, gentlemen, you are not alone. Okay, so September 28th, 2012. I was recovering at work on light duty. I'm a truck driver from surgery in my elbow. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm at work. I get off work at 8 to go to the physical therapy. I go home, get to bed. I believe it was a Friday. I'm almost positive it was. 6 o'clock that night, I get a phone call from my mother demanding to know why her grandson died in a house fire and I didn't let her know. She had to find out from the news. That day, I found out 12 hours after my son had died that I was at work. He had died in a house fire that was negligently caused. So, a little bit of background. I was in the U.S. Coast Guard between 1990 and 1994. And like many other service members, I was not a moral man. I had a child out of wedlock to a woman who I was never going to marry. At the time, I was dating my now wife of now 29 years. And I got out of the military. I got out of the Coast Guard because I wanted to be nearby so that my son would have a father figure in his life. And I saw way too many other men father children who abandoned their children in the Coast Guard. That was not going to be me. Now, my wife, my current wife, the only wife I've ever had, she basically adopted my oldest son as we were starting our own family as her own son herself. She never considered him a stepson. And we stayed extremely close to him throughout his high school years. However, in, I want to say, his freshman year, I think it was maybe his freshman or sophomore year, his mother met somebody online. And never meeting this person before, she had planned on moving out of the state with my son and basically keeping him away from me for the rest of his high school life. Well, if you know anything about Washington state law, it's very not friendly to fathers. Well, because I had been that an involved individual, that involved father in his life, the states found for me and prevented her from taking him out of state. They said, you can go, but you can't leave. It would be a detriment to Patrick if he were to leave with you. And from that point on, until his senior year, she used every moment to drive a wedge in between the relationship I had built between my son and Patrick, between myself and my son Patrick. So much so that he had a violent episode in school, and when I had to confront him with it, he denied it and started becoming extremely agitated towards me. At which point I had to protect my family here in this house, I had to limit his access to his brother and to my wife and to me. And that happened in 2011. That brings us to 2012. After a year of being somewhat estranged from my oldest son, I learned that he had died in a house fire that was negligently caused. That day started a cascading effect of poor choices that I was beginning to make. Now, when I got out of the Coast Guard in 1994, I was about 220 pounds, and I was basically a stick figure. I went in at 185 pounds, came out 220, had a little muscle. But if you know anything about the Coast Guard, when you're on board their cutters, there's not a whole lot of exercises going on other than cardio. And so when I got out, I, tried to remain active with not only my son, but my wife. We'd ride bikes. Being the newly married couple, there was a lot of extracurricular activities. I was in the mortgage industry at the time, and I'd started to gain a little bit of weight. And then I saw something happen in the mortgage industry. We all know it as the big crash. So in 2005, I decided to move over to trucking because one of us had to have a paycheck that was regular. And I've been a truck driver ever since 2005. Now, during that time, I had started to gain a little bit of weight. I still remained active, still considered myself physically fit and healthy. And I probably got up to about 235 to 240 pounds at the time of my son's death. However, everything accelerated after that. I became inconsolable. My wife recommended that I go to see somebody to talk to about this, call it therapy, call it somebody. And I didn't want to do that. I grew up in a time where guys just didn't talk to anybody about what they're feeling, their trauma that they had. She encouraged it, and like I said, I just didn't get the help. Instead, I started to, even though I thought I was active, I started to find comfort in food and high-end beers. Now, why do I say high-end beers? Well, I did grow up amongst a bunch of people that I saw abuse alcohol. And one of the ways that you don't abuse alcohol is if you buy the high-end stuff, well, guess what? You're going to drink less of it. And while that did happen, I was still drinking more. I never got to the point where I was drunk. I wasn't an alcoholic. But I would, if we had a nice dinner, I would make sure I had one of my $20 bottles of beer that were high alcohol, right? And high carbs. And between 2012 and 2015, when my first health scare came around, and I'll get to that in a second, I probably gained 20 to 25 pounds. So I went from maybe say 230 to 250, 255. That first scare that we started getting in the truck driving industry was the company I worked for. There was a big crackdown on tired drivers' sleep apnea. So the company, we had to use their doctor with regards to our commercial driver's license physical. And they told them, hey, keep an eye out for drivers that may be susceptible to sleep apnea. Now, what would happen is that if you were susceptible to sleep apnea, what they did is they measured your neck. And if it exceeded a certain amount on the BMI scale, they took you out of the truck for 2 weeks without pay until they can get you a sleep test, and to see if you required a sleep apnea machine. And we had drivers that failed the sleep test. So they were out of work for a month while their new CPAP machine came in. There was no covering for their hours, nothing for them. Well, I didn't want that. So I went to my doctor at the time and I said, hey, listen, I want to make sure that, I can lose some weight. I don't want to be caught up in all of this, right? So she went ahead and sold me a bunch of prepackaged meals that her doctor's office was selling. Well, my wife and I did that, and for about a year, and I got through the first physical just fine. So now my medical card's good through till about 2017. Well, that cost us hundreds of dollars, and I'm still gaining weight. I mean, my weight went up and down during that time, but they were expensive. They tasted like crap. And then comes what I considered the second scare, and that was my feet started tingling. And I'll link to my video of the foot massager that I just did on the review of, which is 9 years old, I started to develop neuropathy. And again, it was directly related to the weight gain that I was having. Now, in 2017, I'm probably 280, 290 pounds. My youngest son, Nolan, he is in Boy Scouts. And we go on a trip to the Rainier National Park. And what happens is the hike in was perfectly fun, but the hike out, I thought I twisted my knee. When in reality, what it was is just all the weight on my body plus the weight on my back was really grinding down on my knee. So between that and the neuropathy, I got relatively scared fairly quickly. And so went back to the doctor, and actually this was 2016. Went back to the doctor and said, okay, can we have some help here? So they recommended a nutritionist, and the nutritionist took our insurance information, and they went ahead and said, okay, well, you can either buy prepackaged meals or you need to learn how to count calories. There was no discussion on how proteins, fats, and carbs affect the body. There was no discussion on insulin spikes. And here's the thing, is my doctor at the time knew all this because I have a family history of type 2 diabetes and heart disease and testicular cancer in my immediate family. Matter of fact, I had a family member who had toes removed because of uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. But the nutritionist didn't talk to me or my wife about any of those things, right? She just said, you just need to count calories, and this is how you do it. Well, that was all fine and dandy. Again, the peaks and mountains in the valleys with regards to weight loss, I still didn't lose much more than, say, 10 or 15 pounds, and then I immediately gained it back. And as we're coming up to the next physical, again, I don't want to worry. I don't want to worry about a sleep apnea machine. I take on a plant-based diet for almost 90 days. Now, it was a miserable experience. As I'm a local P&D truck driver. Imagine having to go to the bathroom and the feeling of having to go to the bathroom every 20 to 30 minutes. That's what it was like for me on a plant-based diet. Now, I didn't do vegan. I did still eat eggs, but very rarely. And I had chicken and fish. You'd have this giant plate of salad or whatever concoction that you're supposed to eat with beans and everything else, and a little piece of meat like this, right? So that didn't work. So now it's 2018. My son is an Eagle Scout. He's graduating high school. Here's a picture of me with him. And you can see in my face how big I was. I estimate in June of 2018, I am above 320 pounds, significantly above 320 pounds. I'm now developing, which I didn't know at the time, was an enlarged diaphragm muscle, which was causing rib flare. And I was developing a diastasis recti, which is a tear in the abdominal muscle. And you can see in the picture how big I was. But for graduation, we decided to take our son to New York. We still have relatives there. And New York City in June, it's hot, it's muggy, it's miserable. And that entire trip, it was just, I was out of breath. I felt my blood felt like it was pounding in my chest and my head all the time. So when we got back, I had already moved to a different doctor's office. And Dr. Walker, I had interviewed, well, I basically went to his, when my insurance changed that year, I went to him for some hip pain that I had. So he had all the information, but I wanted a new physical, basically with my own doctor saying, hey, listen, I've got to do something here, right? I'm 325, 330 pounds. He comes out into the doctor's office. He goes, hey, Scott, congratulations. You're morbidly obese, hypertensive, and pre-diabetic. And everything I worried about just came crashing down on me. Now, the nice thing is with this doctor, he gave me two options. He said, number one, he says, I know you don't like to take pills, but, and he described to me what A1C, what your A1C levels are, what insulin does, and things like that. He goes, we have medication that will manage your insulin spikes. We have medication that will manage your blood pressure. But he goes, it won't reverse it and it won't cure it. He says, you need to lose fat. He didn't use weight, by the way. He didn't use the phrase weight. You need to lose fat. He goes, option number two. He goes, my wife and I have been utilizing a ketogenic diet for the last 6 months. He says, I've lost 25 pounds of fat. My wife has lost about 25 to 30 pounds of fat. He goes, those are your two options. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to try a ketogenic diet. And I didn't know what it was. At the time I said, okay, so what does it mean? He says, okay, here's a cookbook that I want you to go purchase today. He said, and here are two YouTube channels, one of which, by the way, I no longer watch for many reasons. But they're going to teach you exactly what keto was. And he gave me a basic rundown. He said, basically, you are going to start eating animal proteins. He said, you're going to start eating animal fats. And you're going to start cutting out sugars, carbohydrates, starches, grains, beer. He says, anything that has a large carbohydrate, reading on it on the food label, you don't want it. He says, what you're trying to do is you're trying to drive up what's called ketones in your body that will help you lose fat. I said, okay, doc, let's go ahead and do this. He said, but promise me you're going to try it for at least 90 days. I said, I'll do that. That's not a problem. So I called it. My wife is a leading doctor, said, hey, honey, congratulations, we're doing keto. And that's a whole nother video about what happened when I got home. Short of the story is, though, from July and through October of 2018, I lost 60 pounds of fat. I went from 330 pounds down to between 260 and 270 pounds. I was feeling better than I had felt in years. So I stuck with it. And by June of 2019, I had joined a gym, was working out 5 days a week, and I had finally gotten back down to 220 to 225 pounds. Didn't have any lean muscle at the time. No, not very much. And I was still about 20% body fat. But since then, I have maintained this ketogenic lifestyle, not only for me, but because I cannot allow that trauma to negatively affect the life that I've built. I've got to be here to support my wife. I've got to be here to support my son, my one remaining son. I have family members that rely on me. And that is why I implore you, gentlemen, if you have had trauma in your life, and I have friends that served overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they saw some very ugly things, and they have gone into dark places that I can't imagine. Many of them turned to alcohol. Many of them have turned to food, and they are becoming also metabolically unhealthy. Others, they found God. God bless them. And that has helped them maintain their life. The point of this whole video is you can change no matter what has happened to you in the past. I had to use a ketogenic lifestyle. That ketogenic lifestyle saved my life. I've been doing it now since 2018. I'm heavier now, but I've also built up muscle. I am now averaging 255 pounds, and I regularly lift weights, and I can run a sub 7-minute mile, and I'm 54 years old. Couldn't do that 20, 30 years ago. At least not lift the weights. So anyways, if I can do it, gentlemen, you can too. Please go ahead and hit the like button there. Also, subscribe to this channel if you like the video content. If you think that this video content can help one of your friends or family member, please go ahead, forward it to them. And gentlemen, please remember, the most important thing is that there is no downside to becoming a physically stronger man, a metabolically healthy man, or a spiritually strong man. Thank you very much.